here's $300,000 in one project, it's eaten up, and then I'm left with, okay, so what do we do now with the rest? So for me, it's important to know those things because we're all fighting for the same limited resources. So I acknowledge that it needs to be recognized, but I'm also a little bit apprehensive to say we should be taking on another huge pie when we haven't even figured out how to make our own pie yet. So that's where I'm trying to pull back a little bit and say what I think is workable for me based on the work that we've been doing over the past few years is that I could commit to saying I could present to you a proposed five-year capital improvement plan for 20 through 25, which will of course bring up Masco. And that we should also, as a part of that, be outlining a debt service repayment schedule so that we can have the big picture in mind when we're dealing with these questions and these issues before we go into the operational budget discussion. So those were the two things that jumped out to me that are already on my work plan. So I just wanted to sort of propose those in case those sounded workable to you. Getting back to number 3 on the forecasting, in my mind, how I sort of worded this, and maybe it's slightly different, but it's that we would, that I could, well, I say approve, meaning I would present to you and the FinCom what I see as a financial forecast document. Now, this isn't going to be a living, breathing document that changes every 5 minutes like the model. This is a document, the forecast is essentially, what do we know now? What can we add in from the last budget cycle that we know? And then it becomes, okay, here's what we have, here's what the forecast tells us. It is a projection, it's a tool by which we can say, well, if we need to add this or if we take out that, what does it look like? I would present that to the board, I would present that to the FinCom, and I would say, here's the model we want to use. I plugged in the numbers based on last town meeting. This is what it looks like. And does everybody agree that we can maybe rely on this as sort of a tool to determine if there's any variation in the budget? We can all then maybe look at this and use this as a reference point to say, gee, if we wanted to hire a new police officer, what does that look like? And does it mean that we add in, our personnel expense, or does it mean we take away because our overtime might be offset by that? So as an example, so what I was thinking would be the goal for me would be is if I could plug in those numbers, because I have the tool, I would plug in those numbers and I would present it to you and I present it to the FinCom, and the goal for the Board of Selectmen would be to approve a financial forecast model for the FY20 budget planning by the town's financial management team and the finance committee. So, or even if you wanted to shorten it, approve a financial forecast model for the FY20 budget planning process.
Over what period of time?
It would just be for the coming year. So we would use this as our tool before we kick off the budget planning with the FinCom. We would say, here are the numbers we came up with, and have a discussion with them. And also a discussion with the Board of Selectmen that says, here's what we have. Is there any issue with this? Again, understanding it's a tool, but I need to plug in the numbers and present it, but then we look at it, we get a picture of what it looks like as a forecasting tool, and then we sort of put that aside before we start looking at capital. So it's really only a tool, but it gives us a way to sort of peek into the future based on guesses or assumptions or projections. So what I could commit to is if this board felt that that was a priority, that one of your goals for the board would be to approve a financial forecast model for the FY20 budget planning process. That was how I kind of worded it in my mind.
So when we talk about Masco, the difference between the Masco capital plan and the town of Topsfield's capital plan is, in my mind, the town is not looking at what Masco is doing. What they're looking at is how much money is needed to do whatever Masco has decided to do. So we don't need to do the sort of thing that say, well, does this have a greater priority, this building versus doing that on that landscape or whatever it happens to be, and trying to figure out our capital plan. That's something that takes a lot of work. Masconomet as a team is doing that work.
Yes.
But
So we're just
flowing
gonna plug
down
in
to
the
us
number.
the dollars.
Right.
And that's what we need to include, Kelly. in our forecasting
Absolutely.
is the dollars in our, if you would, if we can call it our capital plan, but it's
line
essentially in our operating costs. Now, interestingly enough, Kelly, you spoke well about the coming year's budget, but I think 3 is looking more at the 5-year, what's happening with parameters. So it's not a solid thing, it's saying we're making an assumption on this, we're making this assumption based on this and this and this, and how does it look and what are the issues? And I think those are very different things. But actually coming back to the budget for 2020, isn't much of the model part of doing what you were saying? The model is really part of that, right? I mean, the model puts the data in, and
The model is based on 1 year. It's about balance, making sure the budget is balanced when we go forward this year to look at our FY20 budget. What the forecast does is it extends beyond this year to let people know that whatever you're voting on this year could potentially have an impact 4 years from now. And so it really just helps as a tool to say, if this board were to move forward, were to say, we need to have another police officer, we have a way that we can put in how much will that cost and what is the impact today and this year and what's the impact 4 years from now. It's merely a tool, but we did a lot of work on it with the Collins Center. All I'm suggesting is that we would take what we already have, plug in the new numbers from the most recent budget year, so that we have a tool that we can work with and look at and refer to before the guidelines are being made by the FinCom on how to move forward.
Is the tool just a spreadsheet that does
It's a series of
calculations
spreadsheets, yes.
based upon a number? So if you're assuming 2.5% growth in this particular
Yes.
line item, something else we recognize maybe 5% for the healthcare.
Right.
So if you put in your numbers, it does all the math
Yes.
for you out for the
Yes.
5 years. So what you're really doing is putting in your initial numbers and then any
Mhm.
big ticket items that may be coming down the pike if
Right.
you anticipate any growth.
Correct.
So is 5 years that much more difficult than 1 year?
The forecast is focused on 5 years. The 1 year is the focus for this year, and what the FinCom is charged with doing is
But
coming up
that
with
way
a
the
balanced
FinCom
budget.
could look at a bigger picture to help
Right.
in making decisions
Right.
about what people are requesting.
Right.
So a lot of the 5-year work you said had already been done.
We have a model, a forecast model that was built 2 years ago, and I need to plug in new numbers from last year's budget so that we can use it this year.
Okay, and then we go to the departments to find out anything new that they anticipate coming down the pike that could be plugged in for future years to give that 5-year view. Like the firehouse being
See, I-
redone.
It's
or-
not, so it's different from the model where they vote on one item and then they update the model. This is really just a tool to say, before we start our budget planning for 20, let's just get a look at where things are going so that we don't make any major decisions based on information we're not quite sure. So it's really just a peek into the future. The reason why I wasn't able to keep up with it is because once we get into budget planning season, we're in a whirlwind coordinating that process. So, and then at that point, looking backwards and plugging numbers into the forecast doesn't really help us. I'm suggesting that with the board's support and your emphasis on these financial projects, that I can find the time to plug in the numbers and to present this and say, here's what it looks like. Okay, now let's put this away for a moment. Let's look at capital next. Okay, if we want to build another building, which is not in our near future right now, but if we were going to build a new building, what does that look like? Let's pull out the model and see what it looks like if we were to do if we assume that, let's assume that the state's going to give us an extra 5% every year in our revenue. What does that look like 4 years from now? It's really just something I just want to get done so that we can do it, and then we can put it aside and then focus on all the other pieces that we need to.
Kelly, I think
move
this
forward.
is something that you're, in my view, as I relate to this, are very much more tactical. And the thing I'm thinking about is something that could be should be put on the website, for instance. But it's sort of, the question is, what does Topsfield financial future look like? And it's not about this year's budget and so on, but it has a little thing that talks about operational things. Well, sped is going up at this rate, this
Right,
may go,
right.
so this operate, then capital, it says, some point we need to replace the fire station, 5 to 10
Right.
years.
Right.
So people can kind of look and see, because if we don't know it's coming,
Yeah.
first of all, if it comes as a surprise, it's gonna generate a lot of resistance. And number two, we need time to make the case and to let people know. And instead of getting into this thing where we're dealing with criticism and critiques and other things after the fact, as happened with the whole town hall project, that a lot of that stuff's happened in advance and that the need has been established and shared. I'm not worried about the model as much as I am the result, which could be displayed on a single screen that kind of summarizes where we're headed with a lot more question marks way out in the future. We review it once a year, update it, and from time to time we pull stuff into the
Yep.
near-term future, and then bang, it starts to appear with a plan in the annual budget for this year.
Yes.
But people see that progression and don't wonder, where did this, I never heard about this before, because I think what's happened is stuff kind of springs up on folks, and I think that
Because we
by
don't
itself.
have these tools in place and what
Yeah, I don't think people care about the tools of the models, they want to know the summary of the information.
So a few minutes back, Kelly, when you were
Yeah.
talking about adding something over to debt repayment, can you pull
Oh.
that phrase back up?
Yes, outline debt service repayment schedule for all existing debt.
That's excellent. That's a really valuable thing.
Okay, so again, just for the limited purposes of this document, under 3, I would suggest leaving A as it was, but ending with the word tools. Then doing B, development of 5-year plan, including debt service repayment schedule. I think the last 3
Yes.
words are implied. That
Yes,
You
yeah.
would never do a
That would
project.
be perfect.
How does that work for this purpose?
So that becomes B.
And one of the outcomes, which I don't think has to be a C, is going to be these documents that are designed for the relatively uninformed public, and by that I mean not the people who are wrestling with the finances as much as we do, and certainly the FinCom do, but allow people to see a bit of what the future looks like. I think that would be an important piece of the outcome, but I think that will naturally evolve as this process
It will.
goes forward.
So we'll have both. We'll actually have the real numbers projected as best we can, as well as this summary, the one-page
The summary
sound
includes
bite.
rough numbers and so on, but not trying to predict, for instance, if there's a major school rebuilding, I hope there isn't, but just say there was, and we think there's going to be some school building authority money. We take a stab at what is sort of happening now, and we make it clear that these are subject to annual review and changes as they get closer, but you know, it makes a big difference if we might have a $2 million refurbishment project or a $12 million refurbishment project looking ahead. And I think it's good for everybody to sort of see this is, the life flow is not climbing the mountains in front of us. We're looking at the whole mountain range ahead and trying to figure out a way to, carrying this metaphor all too far, knock the tops off and fill in the valleys.
Yes.
Fiscal year 2020 town budget. I have an emergency call. I'll be right
Oh,
back. As
okay.
the other clerk, how would you like to try and get some acceptable language from
Sure. All right, any thoughts?
Should I throw mine out first or wait till after?
Sure, why don't you go ahead?
I'm okay with that right there. That to me catches it. I'm
So-
not sure about the reflecting peak borrowing period. but-
So you know what, actually, the outline debt service repayment schedule really was taken from that. So where it says the second half, reflecting peak borrowing period, I kind of took that off and
Yeah.
wrote this other statement instead of that.
And Kelly, I want to say that I think the debt repayment piece as a public document that's posted
Yeah,
is an excellent part of financial forecasting, and that there'll be a
Yeah.
piece of the website that says, where are we going? It's going to have debt repayment, potential projects, and we'll
Well,
refer to
yeah.
what we're dealing with in this year's
Yeah.
budget. And
well, I just also just wanted to clarify as well, though, when we talk about forecast, I just want to make sure our terminology is correct. I think we need to treat a forecast document as separate from, say, a capital plan.
totally.
Because a lot of people think a forecast is set in stone and that it's exactly, and then, you know, the first thing people will say when they see the forecast is, oh my God, we're going to hell in a handbasket. you know, we're heading down this road, we're not, what people also need to remember is that you need to take it as a tool that is supposed to be helpful and not alarming, and it's not, it's just a way so that 5 years from now, if I'm working on my personal home budget, I know that I'm not gonna go buy a house for $1 million if I know that my budget can't handle that 5 years from now.
Alarm is in the
Eye
perception
of the
of the beholder, number one.
That's true.
Number two, I think the analogy needs to be more about hurricane forecasting, which is an
Yeah.
imprecise science, for sure. It's based upon some science.
And then,
We do the best we can, and needless to say, as we get closer and closer, we get more
but
and
the
more accurate stuff.
understanding as well that there are a lot of moving parts.
Of course.
When you deal with an annual budget, much less a budget that goes 5 years out.
No, I realize it, but it's,
But that's going to be some of the leadership that I'll be looking for the Board of Selectmen to help sort of, you know, if we see a forecast and it shows $1 million deficit next year, it doesn't mean we're gonna have $1 million deficit. It means that, given everything we know today, based on our assumptions and projections now, if we do X, then this could potentially happen, but it's based on the worst case scenarios. You can also do, you know, various scenarios. So with me plugging in the numbers and showing you the forecast, there's going to need to be a session by which, a work session where we say, this is what it is, this is what it looks like, and this is how we interpret it, and this is how we use this in a positive way, as opposed to getting everybody sort of, you know, all up in arms thinking that we can't spend any money for the right reasons if town meeting, you know, wants to approve that, or the FinCom is in approval of that. So that aside though, the issue that I had with this one, or the
This is
concern, number 4, fiscal 2020 town budget. The concern I have with this is, number 1, you already touched on it. We already do it every year anyway. So I guess I'm sort of struggling with what makes this, are we just putting it here because we have to do it anyway and we want to, and that's fine.
Because I've been reading this too.
Yeah.
I think I know what's being said here, essentially. Let me read the wording. Preparation of fiscally responsible budget for town meeting reflecting peak borrowing period. So I think that this is a very narrow one. It's the budget overall, but reflecting the peak budget period. So perhaps it's worth it for us to spend just a minute on where we are with it. We have a ban that's coming up on October 19th, so 2 months from now, for $3.5 million that is related to the water department. Okay, so it's not on direct taxes, it's the water department. What are we going to do with that one? There was some feeling that we would, at that point, go to bond, because it's physically there, they know what, it's part of the plant, so it's already been done. The next thing we know is that we have a ban out for $6 million, and that ban is March timeframe?
Yeah.
March timeframe, and that's all related to
March, April,
the town hall. So, and the last piece is that we have the $5.2 million for the school. And the question in part, so we can go out to bond as long as these projects are done, and the school project is largely done, and the town hall will be done by that point. Or we have we're allowed to continue a ban into another year, because it's not that 3-year period, you can't ban it forever. And so I think the key question here is reflecting the peak period, borrowing period. Do we go out to bond, which means that we have to pay a principal starting in March next year, or do we ban it again and wait a year out or 6 months out, whatever, to have our first principal payment into another fiscal year? And sometimes you do it such, if you do it 6 months, you might have one principal payment in the coming year, and then the next year you get the 2 principal payments. Or if you do it 12 months, then you don't get anything in this year, but you get the first year that it comes down, you get both of them. So I think that's what's being said here with the reflective peak borrowing period, is how to, and it's very limited what we have. We know what we have.
So that's,
We have the water treatment plant, we have town hall, and we have the schools. Everything else is to be dealt with in bonds has been dealt with already. We did that back several months ago. We let the bond out. So a $4 million bond, $4 or $5 million bond. So this is, these are the things, and I think that's what that's saying, Kelly.
Okay.
Is that it? Is
I'm
that?
sorry that I came in the
Okay,
middle,
so
but I don't think
what
that's
we're
what I
trying to do
meant to
is
say.
we're
All
trying
I
to
was,
parse
I can
out-
just, as a person that just threw those words out there, I didn't, all I was trying to say was, there's been, I believe we received a lot of information about concern about how much was done in a short period of time in terms of capital outlay. You know, the schools,
yep.
the town hall, and the water.
Big capital.
And that,
You're right.
I was trying to find a way to say that the budget this year would take that into account.
Right,
That's
and that's what I just
That was
kind
what
of.
Dick was saying, yeah.
Right, and
Okay.
the main issue is, the water treatment plant is separate, but, and it's not the whole plant, it's only $3.5 million of it. We already did $1 million of the plant, then this is 3, so it'd be about half of the plant would go out to bond if in October we went out to bond and got half the plant taken care of in a bond. But again, that's water. The main thing is the town hall and the schools, do we band again in the spring? Or do we go out to bond? Or do we split it a little bit? Based on what our bond payments are right now into next year and when they roll off and when we want the new principal to start hitting.
I'm not saying that
Pretty
is at all,
straightforward. Isn't that
that's
what
not
that
at
says,
all what I was
reflective?
talking,
Oh.
that's not what I intended
Oh.
to say. That's-
What were you saying then?
I was
In
saying
reflective.
that we're not gonna do any new projects that aren't absolutely necessary until it comes back down.
Got it.
Is
Okay.
this
Apologize if
reflected
it's-
somewhere though, Kelly, when you were talking about your debt repayment schedule, you said of existing debt? Is this additional debt that's coming down reflected in that so that we
I-
can see what is hitting and when? I'm not
Here's
sure
the
the process
problem.
for
Here's the problem.
evaluating
That's
those
what I'm-
options,
Kelly, let me
staying with a
try to- let me
ban
try to
or
answer it
going
this
with
way.
a permanent.
Once a bond goes out, there's no question but what the schedule is. Our question in part is, when do we go out for a bond?
Right, and which option do you
And
take,
then,
permanent
once you
or-
go out for the bond, the
Yes.
question, if you decide, there's a little bit of difference because is it a 3%, a 4%, you know, so there's additional that way. But the big hit is, when do you start paying principal?
Right.
You know you're gonna pay a certain amount for the interest, and that's gonna vary, so that's an unknown. But the big hit, so to speak, that you're not thinking about is that principal. And the question is, when do you go out to bond to have that hit? Once you're out to bond, then it's clear what your payments are. But until you go to bond, you don't know, and that's what.
Right, but that discussion, I'm not sure how that actually is handled. Does that come
That's
before the board?
that's for us to be discussing, like, near term here, because we have, again, in 2 months, there's a bond going out, or a ban that expires, so we have to do something. And then we know another one is in the spring.
Is that usually the process that you come up with the options and come before the board to talk about them?
The treasurer, and I and the financial management team meet with the financial advisor to come up with recommendations, and then those come before the board. I see them as simultaneous in that if I can outline the repayment schedule for all existing debt, you're gonna see exactly what Dick was just talking about. What's temporary ban versus what's permanent bond, when they're gonna roll off. What are the variations? You may or may not have a choice to decide if you wanna permanently bond or if you wanna wait. So decisions so far that haven't been made yet that I know of, I was talking with Barbara. The bottom line though is that if I can identify this and present you with the repayment schedule that's been recommended by the financial advisor and the treasurer, then we have something to talk about. And then we can say, okay, this is what's recommended, and if the treasurer and financial advisor and myself are recommending one option, that I could say, well, the other option is to do it this way instead, which means what? Which means that the impact of the borrowing and the repayment is going to hit a lot harder this year, or we can push it off and do what's recommended and then push some of that to next year.
Is
to
this
level
done in
that.
time for the development of the budget?
It's already been done, it's already in place, so.
What we've just talked about, the 3.5, the 6, the 5.5
That
million?
happens as we get closer, so in October, we're gonna have to go for a bond, and then, but before that point, I'm gonna show you the outline of what's up, what's gonna come due, and what the plan is to move forward, and then
And we'll
you
probably
basically
see that
sign
probably in the next month or so.
Yes.
We
Yes.
should see that.
Yeah.
So it's in time for the
And
budget?
trying to make, trying
I-
to plan out
I
what we're
see
gonna
it-
do in the spring.
And I
It's
see
nice
it as
to-
part of our capital planning project as well, because we can't be planning next year's capital and be, suggesting that we borrow if the impact to taxpayers is so high right now that we can't responsibly, suggest that we would add to that burden at this
So
point.
why can't we just say preparation of a fiscally responsible budget for town meeting? My notion is if it's fiscally responsible, it's not looking
I'd
just
love
at
to
this
say
year.
that, I thought you'd never, I
It's
thought that would
looking-
never fly in a million
Next.
years.
It's not fiscally responsible if it isn't looking ahead, and that's all we
I will
need.
Got
have
it.
sweet dreams about that tonight, I would love to say.
So I would
Well,
take
what
off
does-
reflecting broad.
I'm sorry, I would have, I would never
Got
have
it.
thrown that in, I thought it, I thought it.
Okay.
So I'm in
So,
agreement
tell
on that.
me, I'm sorry, I don't know if I understand, because I see preparation of a fiscally responsible budget. First of all, the Board of Selectmen doesn't prepare the budget.
This is a town
Okay, so I
priority,
just,
this is, I'm not saying who does it,
These are town goals.
these are town goals,
Okay.
not your goals. They're, you
Oh,
have parts of them.
I'm
Not
thinking,
our
I don't wanna
goals,
be stepping
either.
on the FinCom's toes
No, this is,
either.
No,
We
no,
don't
no,
prepare
no.
the
town,
budget.
but we could, that,
But we
we set
coordinate the budget process.
Yeah, but
That is certainly
that-
within, so
Well,
I'm just trying to
town-
figure out what's the goal here, because we're already doing this already, I think.
because
You know what I mean? Like, what's the
no,
goal
that's why it
statement?
says fiscal
the
2020.
decision was made early
It's
on in
this
this
year's.
process, not to just pick out the new stuff, but to put all the big stuff on one sheet. Whether you agree or disagree
But
with that.
that's not the
that was
budget
the truth.
necessarily,
The
that's
budget is a huge
capital.
piece, we
No,
gotta
it's
do it, it
budget.
cannot be set aside because we have other priorities.
Okay,
the
so in
decision
my
was
mind,
made
I'm
to put it
separating
on here.
operations from
You're
capital.
segmenting like,
Yeah,
no.
so, but if this gets rolled down to me, what does this mean? Preparation of a fiscally responsible
The
budget is a
job you would
balanced
expect to
budget.
do on your own anyway.
Anyway,
This, there's
okay.
no change
Okay.
on that, it's just,
Well,
Putting
items
it in
2
here.
and 3 would help support item 4.
well, there are other things that will help support it, so you
Right.
may have additional inputs and so on and so
Okay.
forth, but it's, this in itself does not say that anything's gonna be done differently, other than the
Acknowledge that
assumption,
it's-
acknowledge that we have some unique situations this year,
Yeah.
but I would absolutely not expect a budget to be put together that didn't reflect those things with an eye to what may be coming next year. That's how you do it.
And it's
Period.
also, fiscally responsible, to me, is a balanced budget.
There you go.
Can't, the law doesn't allow us to do anything
So
else.
I'm fine with just kind of leaving that there. I think we're overworking
Well, what's a balanced budget?
Well, it doesn't say that.
It doesn't say
That's
balanced.
Kelly's
Yeah, right.
it. Yeah, that don't say balanced.
Yeah, but
Well,
Kelly's
but
definition at
this-
this point was a balanced budget.
No, I would
But
not
what
say
you want
would
to
not
balanced.
avoid
say
with these
that
goal
at all.
statements is something that's so broad that nobody understands what we're trying to
Yeah, what
do.
does that mean?
Is it within two, another way of saying it is a
Without
budget
an
within
override?
2.5.
What about cash?
So I can't commit.
No,
to
I can't
that.
say that either.
I'm just saying it, that's another way of saying
I
it.
think
To
it's
some people
okay.
thinking about.
Back to your initial
I'm
point.
not.
It's okay, I think it's okay for us to have different pictures. That's what we'll be thinking about, deliberating about over the next year.
I'm with
That's an exact point.
Right.
I mean,
And
I
I'm glad
can't.
it doesn't say
I'm
balanced
not-
budget.
I can't see me supporting any type of override this particular year, but you never know what someone comes along.
Okay, so preparation of a fiscally responsible budget for the town, is that?
Number 5.
Is that right?
Number 5,
Is that right?
yes, yes.
No, I've got the language on this.
Okay.
I'm happy to do both to do it. Number 5. I think it's a big item on our agenda. If people want to word it differently or whatever, that's
Not necessary, in my opinion. We'd like to reach a contract in a timely manner, which is kind of required by the contract anyway, so I think it's entirely covered by what's there.
Anybody else want to tinker or add or something? Number 6. Again, I'm only going numerically on what's in the sheet. No, I'm not implying priority at this point. All right, so are we still into the possibility of 6 and 7 together, or you want to leave them separate?
I would like to see them separate.
And number 6, town operational systems.
I guess part of my concern on
I think this is your, right?
Yeah. Implementation of a plan. I'm not sure we can just implement this year. I think it's a matter of, we need a plan. For instance, if we were to combine some departments or something like that, I'm not necessarily presuming we're gonna pull that off by May. So I would just sort of say, you know, consider future improvement and consolidation of it and develop a plan as appropriate. If we were in the process of doing planning at the end of this year, we'd be a lot further ahead than we are now. And it may take longer than that, because I think there's a lot of politics in that, and I think there are a lot of complexities.
So how would you prefer to word it? Just go slow.
I would say,
Start
consider,
with Pete, okay?
consider opportunities for future improvement
Okay, stop for a minute. Okay,
and consolidation of current town operations, comma, and draft implementation plan or something like that, or it could be.
initial,
Initial implementation plan,
And develop initially?
or yeah, anything like
and
that.
develop,
The plan kind
How
of
about
follows
identify?
behind.
How about?
just what, you gotta do
Identify next
one
steps.
voice at a time. I'm really not that good at the secretary stuff. And develop initial, what was it?
Initial
Implementation plan.
Initial implementation plans is not necessarily going to be just be one.
Okay,
It
then what
makes
were you
it-
saying?
I was just thinking identifying as opposed to drafting or implementing.
Yeah, we didn't say implementing.
It's develop.
Right now I have
Develop.
develop.
Develop is
Initial,
fine, develop
yeah.
is fine, yeah. I want to leave implementation off right now.
Okay, so this is, let me just read it to what I think I have. Consider opportunities for future improvement and consolidation of current town operations, comma, and development, then it would.
Initial implementation plans.
Yeah, but it would be development,
Is that
right?
right?
Yeah.
So
Develop initial
If you-
implementation
And
Consider
plan.
and
development of
develop.
initial,
And development of initial
Development of-
implementation plans.
And this idea of improvement and consolidation, it may be many, many pieces of it, but it may be just even in town hall, something that goes together between the inspectional services and Board of Health.
Yes.
well, we did that by
We
combining.
did some of that already,
Exactly.
maybe there's more of that, right on.
And there may be some operational efficiencies with regionalization in the police department or the fire department.
Right.
There may be things that are just internal to the town that are
Some
much bigger.
outsourcing, there's a,
Exactly,
different
looking at
opportunities.
all of that. is all on the
So
same.
does this tie in then with the task force who has been asked, I don't think we've identified the group yet, but to look at the town administrator position and roles and responsibilities? Because part of this, it depends on what we're defining that to be, but if that group is to look at, let's say, groups outside of the town administrator, because the town administrator actually, right now, only has the financial group, the town clerk, and what else do we have? Financial, the town clerk.
Wait a minute, there's everything, there's inspectional services, Board of Health.
They don't report it to Kelly. They have their own board.
No,
They
Inspection
do,
plans.
Inspectional does.
they all do, they're,
So like the highway,
They all
I'm
do.
thinking, the
It's
the ones
mostly
water.
that do
Department of
not,
Public
highway,
Works.
water,
The public-
and park and cemetery.
Yeah, Public Works is what I'm thinking of. So the Public Works is outside of, right now, the domain of the town administrator. If that should be something to look at when we're considering town operations, and I don't know, does it tie in to the roles and responsibilities of the town administrator? Would it be something that would roll under the town administrator? Is that an
It might.
opportunity?
It might,
But
but I think
I-
that's kind of separate from the
I agree.
town administrative thing. There may be a relationship though. I'm
Exactly.
with you.
Is that group to look at those in
No.
concert with this, or it's totally separate?
No, they should look at that in terms of how to administer the town. These to me are efficiencies that are more on the functional level, less than the management level, I think.
I think we should be looking at both, because if you're
Well,
gonna make some
We are gonna look at both.
significant impact,
But I think they need to work independently and then come together. I would not want to hold off on this, nor would I want to dilute looking at town operational
oh no,
systems.
not at all. I just wouldn't want them to be looking at the same thing.
No,
I
I
don't
won't
want
be.
two
They
groups
shouldn't be.
looking at the same activities, because
They
depending on
shouldn't
how
be.
this is defined, if they say we think these other responsibilities should be under a town manager position for the
They
town,
give
and
us
another
updates.
group is off looking at the same thing.
If we do updates on both sides and we see there's potentially some interaction, then we can deal with it at the time. But I would not dilute this by conjoining the two at this stage again.
No,
agree with Dick
I
on that.
just want to make sure that we're not going down two separate paths, two groups looking at a lot of the same things. Because if you're looking at the roles and responsibilities under Kelly, do they start to look at the structure? And if they do, that could be looking at the same thing that this other group
It's
is looking at.
possible that proposed structural changes, if adopted, would impact the responsibilities of the town administrator in
Definitely.
whatever definition of that, but I don't think that is something that we need to put together at this stage. That would be down the road.
Yeah, I wouldn't put them together, just be cognizant that whatever we give as direction to one group, if there is overlap or communication between, or they're looking at the same things, we just be cognizant of it, so we're not duplicating.
Yep.
Okay, we're okay on that one? Do I need to reread it, or I just did, that's enough?
I think it's,
Number 7, town technology systems. I would suggest in A that, even if it's repetitive, that we put technology back in there, so it's review of town technology systems.
Yeah, and to me, and again, I don't know if this is implied in your mind or we should add, it includes looking at what do we have now? Who owns it, manages, maintains it? What does it integrate with? What functions does it provide, and how well? Because my guess is that there are lots of islands that aren't really integrated at this point. And that's okay in our initial assessment, but we're looking at the software and we're also looking at the functionality of how it all goes together. The second piece would be, based upon that information, can we make improvements? So maybe we have a system that could be broadened a bit and the vendor now offers functionality that we were not aware of, and we say, hey, it'd be much more efficient to do this all, and that kind of a thing might come out of this, but it takes that initial analysis to determine.
I don't think using this simplistic language is inconsistent with it.
No, and I was going to say, as long as I'm around, I will, continue to push for a very robust analysis there. But I'm okay with just review town technology systems.
Can I give you a kind of an update on that a little bit? Yeah, there is this thing about maybe multiple systems and things within the town, and we should understand what they all are. Interestingly enough, at least until recently, we have really had one single integrated system for all the financials that go on, whether it be payroll or normal budgeting, whatever, and it's all under this tile umbrella, whether it's the right thing or not. And one of the things that happened about 3 years ago, for example, was this idea of what do we do about dog licenses? And so we went out and did get a separate one there. And then most recently, we went out and got a separate thing for permitting. But I think you would be surprised at how much of what we have is really under one single umbrella. Right or wrong, the good news is it's under one umbrella. Is it the most efficient umbrella? I'm not going to say.
Right.
But I think it's important to do. But don't be surprised at the fact that we really have a limited number of not in the integrated box, so to speak.
That'd be great, Dick. It'd be good to know that.
But the pressure is on, I think, and it's really not in here, but we keep seeing it in the various things that we talk about, such as board docs, for example. And we talk about when we go out to a separate place where we're going to keep our permits and that, is really this document management, what we want to do about that. And somehow, this is, like we say, this is a high-level thing, technology, but we've got to decide what we want to do with that, in my mind, so that we don't create something that is not integrated, which if you want this document, it's over here. If you want this document, it's over here. If you want this one, it's over here. And how do I find the ones that I want? I think that's something that we somehow, or even make it a C. It's within B, but it seems to me it's so important now, if for no other reason, that we'll keep pushing on things that are potentially
why don't we add
non-integrated.
Why don't we add to be including document management?
Yeah, that's fine. That's
No
fine.
problem. Is that all right?
Sure.
I mean, we do have other systems, the assessment system, tax assessment system, is that built into the payroll system too?
No,
See the other thing?
I'm sorry, the one that's used by the assessor for purposes of keeping the
Right,
assessment
that's
data
another
is
one, yeah.
Patriot.
Yeah, I realize.
Patriot system.
Yeah. Anyway, I think we're on the same page, and I hope to discover that things are really put together in a more robust and useful fashion, and if anything, it's just, there may be a few efficiencies we could do, or expansions of functionality, but that'd be great if that works out. I absolutely agree that document management, version control, and basically lateral compatibility and evolutionary compatibility, so that we don't end up with something that sunsets and we have to pay for an expensive conversion in the future. And if it's sitting in somebody else's database in proprietary format, those are all the things that I think would be included under that document management piece.
And there's a limited number of, I mean, so there is the Laserfiche, there is the tile content management. Socratica is now part of that particular one, and so that's, you gotta be careful. They're the same company, so to speak, but they're different things. But yeah, they're bringing those together. So within the municipal government, there are not necessarily a huge number of these document management things. Okay.
So anyway, that's good. And I think we're on the same page.
Some of the things I think are easy, very easy to implement. They take some effort, and I would like to think that we would, during election time, I spoke with you, I spoke with everybody who was running for office. I said, what we really want to do, for example, is take a look at the Tyler citizen transparency.
Yep.
The data is all there. They have a whole program that they do it. The big deal is, what do we want to put out there of it? For example, Linfield uses it. It's straightforward. Once you turn it on, they automatically update the stuff in the database for us, and it's available on the web and things like that. So it's not a big thing to implement or keep going. Big thing is to make some decisions. And so if we had it in a plan, then when we go to town meeting, you know,
Right, well, we know what we're
it's in the
looking for.
budget and all this sort of thing.
The key in my view is efficiency first, so that the most important asset we have, the people, are getting more done and we're not having to hire more people. Cost savings, there are some direct cost savings in doing that. And the third is basically communication, and that is where access by the public, so that ultimately, in the best view that I have of the future, and I know there are some people that don't have computers, but by and large, and this is where the library may play an important part for those that don't, essentially, our town website becomes the window into what's going on in the town, and you don't look in through that window and have the feeling that there are rooms that are there that I can't see. That there's kind of a picture and there's a sense of I can get my arms around it to the extent I want to take the time to learn.
Well said.
So we, just as a backup, so we added comma including document management.
Yep. I
Okay,
like that.
number 8, downtown revitalization.
I think it's a support of, because I don't think we're going to be the leaders, are we? Support of effective town business residents, or are we going to do the establishing?
Well, I think, that's a good question. I think that we, for lack of a better word, bless the approach. I mean, they don't have a town business residents approach if it isn't one that this board is participating in, however
Then
we do that.
blessing of effective town.
Well, I don't think I'm allowed to, I don't think I'm allowed to use that word. What do you think, Al?
I like it.
Participation, yeah?
Yeah, I would say active engagement with, or active participation, anything like that.
What about participation in?
I think the B that is missing essentially says, and I'm not going to put this into final words here, but that the town is going to continue to be proactive in seeking ways that, acting as the town, we can support this. So that I know there's some stuff that you're doing right now with KP Law and so on that is independent of that coalition.
Would you say continuation of, is that a?
Yeah, I would say continuation of town engagement in seeking avenues for positive action or something like that. So
And supporting avenues?
yeah, something like that. Basically that we're not only going to support what the people in the town want to be part of and all that, which I think is important, but we're doing some stuff in, that is going on right now. It's sort of in the legal review stage, but there's the potential for good stuff to come out of that, and I think that we should indicate that we intend to continue doing that kind of investigation or consideration, meetings and so on. I think it's, first of all, an important message to everybody, and I think it establishes something that we as a Board of Selectmen need to do on behalf of the residents.
Okay, so for A, we, instead of the words that we write participation in,
Yep.
does it be, I get the beginning of it, continuation of town actions towards, should we just repeat
Continuation of-
improvement of downtown area?
Yeah, exactly. Town actions and initiatives for development.
I'm worried about
improvement.
the word initiatives just because it's so grandiose, kind of.
With a small line. I don't know, that can be something else. I pick initiatives. You can pick
Do
something
we then take that to the next level to actually identify what we're doing? Do we
Not
have
yet.
something in mind that we want to focus on? Now, we've thrown it out before, whether or not this is the thing, but, taking a look at the parking situation,
We're getting a review right now.
should we be identifying those so that we're all aware of what we're working on, so the town knows specifically what things we're trying to
To me,
accomplish?
parking analysis and support maybe with state grants, that to me is what I mean by initiatives.
Okay, so at some point, there'll be a lower level objective beneath that goal that says, this is what we're working on?
It's a contributory objective.
Just, because we have to
I wouldn't put it
identify
down
who's going to
separately.
work on these things and when we're looking to have them done and give a readout on some of these things. So at some point, we have to get a little specific. Not that we have to
One of the
today,
things
but.
that we have asked the Topsfield Village Club was to give us some of the vision that they have for what the town would be, what the downtown village would be. And I think that vision then is something upon which we can build.
Are they actually putting that together?
Well,
Because last I
we asked them
heard,
when they came, we asked
Yeah.
them for that vision. So if nothing else, an artist's concept of a vision, that's, if we don't have a vision, then we.
exactly,
and-
my
and
fear is,
pieces of it
in
may not be
talking with the
possible.
folks in that committee, I'm not sure the ones on that committee want to continue working on that committee. They've been doing this an awful long time, so
They're tired.
they're tired. I just want to make sure this actually
Yeah.
moves forward and it just doesn't remain a vague platitude.
The
that-
challenge I see, Lynn, is that there are a number of possible things I can envision for strategic reasons, as well as not wanting to make promises that can't be kept. I'm at this moment disinclined to kind of list off a bunch of things.
Yeah, we don't have to right now, but
But ultimately,
the next step.
we'll want to refine this further, and I see that as part of the outcome of this effort is to sort of say, hey, here are three initiatives that
Oh,
we
I
could
don't mind,
undertake.
I don't mind if we actually come up with one.
No, and
Complete streets,
there are
applying for another grant.
yeah,
would
and I
be
was going to say, if
example.
Complete Streets was, somehow tied effectively to some bigger vision in some way and so on. But there are some possibilities that are not currently in the discussion sphere of discussion in Topsfield Village Love, and some things, and so there are some conversations going on that may change things and may have us say, oh, that's something nobody thought of, maybe that's something we can engage in. I want to leave it kind of open so it can move that direction.
that's perfectly fine, as long as we know someone is working on it, moving it in that direction, and it's not just, well, I thought you were doing it, I thought he was having a conversation, and at the end of the year, we're kind of just saying we're supporting downtown.
I'm talking with some private owners in that general area down there and seeing if there's any appetite for coordinated action. I don't want to say more right now because people are sensitive, but the point is that we're trying to think outside the box, trying to move things further. I don't think trying to be more specific here is
Yeah,
at
I
this
agree.
moment helpful.
Sure.
But we're trying to make something happen that would be very complementary to Topsfield Village Love, but beyond that.
Okay, so what I have for B is construction of town actions toward improvement of the downtown.
That's fine.
9, sign bylaw. I threw in it's my viewpoint that if you're gonna do something like this, the first thing you do is stop and look at the bylaw and see if it, was passed in 1742, or if it still makes sense, or, it's just
Right.
to me, the logical first step, that's all.
And I can tell you, having talked with Martha several times about this, that first of all, she rolls her eyes. We just did that, and so on and so forth. One of the things that I think is important, and this is, and I thank whoever reminded me of the sort of the generic name for it, but the broken window theory, that one of the things, for instance, that would help is it's the pop-up signs that drive people nuts and so on. And I have yet to find out, I've not talked with Amy and Kelly, this is sort of something I was going to talk with you about too. If it is on public land, do we have to can we not just pick it up?
On public land, yes.
If we can pick it up, right off the bat, there's
So you're
about,
talking about a public way, you're talking about
I'm talking
town-owned
about-
property?
I'm talking about Route 1, which may be one sort of thing, but along Route 97 and so on, there, outside of the telephone, on the street side of the telephone poles, because I know the telephone poles are all on land that is not owned by the lot owners behind them, and so on. One thing I'd like to see is just have someone go around and pick off all those that are clearly on public land. Just pick them up, and then if people ask, they're up at the DPW, we'll keep them for 3 months and they'll throw them out. But that would take care of probably, 50 to 60 signs right off the bat.
Really? Do you really think? I mean, because
Yes.
I've looked at signs and that I did, certainly downtown, I don't see them on public land.
So my question is, all those that are at the edge of the Topsfield Village and so on,
Yeah.
right in line with the sidewalk where it crosses, does that go? I don't know.
Well, you have to be careful, yeah. I mean, that's right at a boundary, but I think that they are on private land.
But, well, there are a lot of others around town. I get, I'm nothing against these as individual businesses, but the Clark School has got their rolling admission signs all over the place.
Yeah.
There's so many of them. The Frontiero Brothers had a very big sign at the corner on public land.
So, Kelly, can we go ahead and make arrangements to have them? I mean,
I've had,
building inspector can go do that.
to
as
me,
part
that
of,
is a building inspector
as
thing, and
part
if the
of,
building inspector can't do it,
enforcement.
then I would expect you, Kelly, as the building inspector's boss, to come to us and say, we don't have resources to do this. You might question why not, but I think that's something that somebody needs to spend
As
an
a
hour a
board-
week.
As a board, as the leadership and executive committee of the town, I would ask that maybe one of our upcoming work sessions, we have Glenn come in and explain what we can and can't do, and also explain that this could be a double-edged sword, that we're gonna be pulling out, if you're having breakfast at the Daybreak Cafe and they have a sign sitting out and we pull it from the ground, we need to make sure that we all understand what the bylaw says, and so reviewing it is the first
You have
piece.
to, I don't
No.
know what's in the bylaw.
I
So-
agree totally with that.
I'm
but-
not saying we can't do that. I mean, I could go around, the one outside of DPW, it takes everything out of me not to pull over to the side of the road and yank it out of the ground.
But some of them, Glenn has said he won't pick up any of them without a complaint. And my concern is that if it's on public land versus private land, I
That's a simple
presume,
question to answer, but I think,
he said he couldn't and wouldn't, and I don't know if that's the case,
well,
so that's
if we
where we
review
need
the
to check.
signed bylaw and we clarify some of these issues and we talk with Glenn and say why you can do, you cannot,
Okay, no, that's good.
then that helps to solve the question with everybody at the table, and also gives him the opportunity to say, I've been there before, careful what you wish for. Because when we start ripping these signs out, you're gonna get phone calls from all these people saying, are we pro-business or aren't we? So
Okay,
there
so
comes
can
a
we
call.
put this on the agenda for
Let's please.
October?
Thank you.
October, thank you. Can we do that
Early
as a
in
work session? in
I
October?
don't object, but why do we have to do it as a work session?
Yeah, it'd be good.
So that he
for
doesn't have
public
to come
input.
to
I kind of like.
No, to get Glenn's feedback before we sit in a public
Glenn,
meeting.
Glenn, that's a different story.
Glenn.
Okay,
Oh,
maybe,
yeah.
maybe to get Glenn to come.
We do need to have it
At
on a
3
public
o'clock.
meeting that is
Oh, yeah.
Well, they're
actually
all public
televised, because a lot of people, that is the biggest
Yeah,
single complaint I
So
get.
I think
and
what
it's such
what
a
Kelly's
small one.
suggesting is we explore it a little.
I don't
Let's
have a problem
explore it.
exploring it, but I'd like to, the results of that exploration, I would like to
That's
have
why
on
this
a,
exercise
on
is
a
so
Monday
important.
meeting.
I know that I need to focus on
Yeah.
that activity.
Can you
get
just
it on
make
the
sure
agenda.
that we have either a highlighted copies of the bylaw distributed or a
I'm
summary
gonna, I
or
have them
something?
on my desktop, I will email them to you.
Yeah,
But with a little highlighting or a little something that arrow to the substantive.
it's not too hard.
It's
because
really not, it's not
One
that
piece on
long.
signs, one piece on
I
signs.
forget.
I will get a copy,
The
but well,
enforcement's in a different
can
this is
section.
your chance to check one of these items off the list, review of the sign bylaw.
That
Check.
one,
I'll email it to you.
that one we could do, and I think that that's one
Never
that
saw me,
we
it's
could
a great
also
cure.
review and more or less get a policy together
Easy,
in
easy.
October, because I think making some improvements on that. There are additional issues with the sign bylaw
Yeah.
that have to do with things on private property that are well outside what is
Yeah.
permitted, and how we deal with that. So the pull-up signs are just one thing, and I think being able
Yeah.
to take them,
I
the
agree.
proliferation of the dandelions, as I think of them, the
Yeah,
advertising dandelions that are along all the roadways, I'd like to see them come out. There's a different issue around flags at the gas station, internally lit signs, all that sort of stuff.
yeah.
We have to make some decisions about what we're
Yeah.
willing to enforce and what we're not. And frankly, if we decide we're not willing to enforce, then we need to change the bylaws
Oh, my
to reflect
goodness.
that. So Route
Uphold
1
the
is an
laws.
example.
This is what we sign up for, is to uphold the laws. So if we're
Yep.
not gonna uphold the law,
We change the law.
absolutely, we either fix the law or we.
So the number of signs that are out of compliance on Route 1, for instance, we may have to change that. I know it's the last thing Martha wants to do on the zoning subcommittee, but those are the things we need to go through and I think take a leadership role on.
Yeah, but in the past, when somebody put up a sign on a common or across from the library or something like that, those things were swept up and they actually, we had a place to put them on the town hall entryway, lay down flat, either there or on the side.
Yeah.
So we just wouldn't allow them to be there. I don't know that we have many problems. As a matter of fact, we don't really have any problems on that.
Well, the proliferation of those pop-up signs has been dramatic this year.
Oh, okay.
And I have noticed a lot, to the point where they're now competing with each other.
Can I
on
just
public
ask,
property.
could we have, because Glenn, I think there are two pieces to this. One is to get Glenn's thing.
Mhm.
Since it's the 3 o'clock meeting, perhaps Glenn could join us on the 30th? August 30th?
That'd be great.
Maybe, it doesn't necessarily have to take a long time, but
Well,
if he gave us 20 minutes on his
That's
thinking
not up
about
to
what
me,
he can
that's
and
up
can't
to you
do.
as the board, because we've got a huge list here.
Yeah,
And if I put everything from this list onto September, onto the 30th meeting, you won't get any other items accomplished, so that's really up to
I'd
you.
like to take 20 minutes just listen to him, because
just
there
listening to
may-
Glenn,
there
right.
may be information based upon us looking at the bylaw and so on, that we're gonna have to do either some legal research or other stuff. If we're gonna work on this in October, I'd like to have the input earlier. And frankly, I think it's important for us to be able to say to town folk, even if it's just part of an administrator's report in public meeting, you know, when we're in the town hall and being recorded and broadcast, I think it's important for people to know that this is not something, as a lot of people think, that we're not paying attention to, that we are. And I'd like to have that reminder out to folks.
Do we know for sure if we need to revise it? The bylaw?
Don't know that we need
No.
to.
Okay, because right now it says review and revision of the
Yeah,
current bylaw.
and
so
potential
we may-
revisions.
Oh,
Potential.
potential, oh, yeah,
we may
yeah,
not.
thank you.
It's
Yeah.
either gonna be a massive enforcement issue, or there may be some revisions that are appropriate, but that's a conversation for when we have that meeting. I've talked about
Now,
Possible,
by the
wrote the
way-
word possible.
Potential,
Possible.
yeah. This is online, I mean,
Yeah, it's very
it
simple.
it is on the website, right? All of our bylaws are up
Yeah,
there, so,
yeah.
yeah,
A
okay.
little
I
hard
don't
to
have
find.
enough
Just
time to
not
find
all
them.
in spot. Yeah, you have to know where to
But-
find it.
You
When
just
we
are
get
able to
one
find
done,
it.
you will have enough time to find it, because you'll find it just like that.
I put, for me, I put in, after enforcement procedure, I just said with, so what does that mean? I just thought that it should say something similar to, like, with strategies for education and compliance. I just don't know what enforcement procedure
Review of enforcement procedures.
I say review of enforcement.
And ensure enforcement, we don't
Just the point is what powers do we have to enforce it? And we're gonna go through and that's where Glenn will help us, because he can give out, he can do fines for signs that are out of compliance.
Okay, I will,
We'll talk about
I will
that then.
retype this, because now it's not my thoughts, it's the group's, so as I understand it.